the founding CEO of the Repairability Institute, which has done actually amazing work on circular economy in general in the US. We have also Siddhartha Prakash. So Sid is a senior researcher at Akatu Institute, and he is the author of several reports on product lifetime extension and also more broadly on circular economy. He is a very active member of our working group on product lifetime extension. We also can count on David Fitzsimmons, who is the director of the European Remanufacture Council, representing, multiple business sectors and trade associations that extend the life of products, especially through manufacture and refurbishment. He's also a very active member of our working group on product lifetime extension. We also have Helio Matar, president of Akatu Institute for Conscious Consumption. And Helio has created and led a number of organizations in Brazil, mainly focused on fostering individual consumer consciousness and corporate social responsibility. He's also the co-lead of the working group of product lifetime extension. We also have Bruna Tiuso, who is a journalist and communications manager at Akatu Institute, who will moderate the discussion later on today. Before I progress, I just would like to ask Marina, who is supporting us with the slides and the logistics today, to please make sure we are recording this webinar so we can share the recording with all of you afterwards.
Just to say, I have already started the recording.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, David. That's very much appreciated. So the next one, please. Thank you. So just before we start diving into our topic today, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Consumer Information Program for Sustainable Consumption and Production, which is the umbrella in which we have the working group on product lifetime extension. So the next one, please. Thank you. So under the Consumer Information Program, we have 4 working groups. And the main objective of the program is to support implementation of SDG number 12, which is the one on responsible consumption and production. And we do that by improving the information provided to consumers in the first instance. Because as we all know, currently, for many products, for several products, sustainability information is either lacking entirely or lacking in credibility. So this is essentially what we aim to improve with our program. We do have a newsletter that we send out every 2 months, and then we give an update from the program, the partners, and then we announce upcoming events such as this webinar. You can visit our website for news and lots of information on the topic. And also we regularly organize events with our partners, sessions in conferences, or more recently, online events like this webinar. So I'll be sharing with you information on how to join the program if you wish, or how to subscribe to our newsletter towards the end of this webinar. The next one, please. Thank you. So within the program, as I had said, we have 4 working groups, and one is specifically that focus on product lifetime extension to advance circular economy. The aim of this working group is basically to push progress towards product lifetime extension policies and practices from the perspective of consumer information. We also, of course, want to promote the work we do on this topic, and also the work that our partners do, and also to communicate to and to engage with consumers on product lifetime extension practices. So this is for you to know where this whole webinar sits into. The next one, please. Thank you. So Thanks. So we have developed a couple of resources, including, publications, infographics, and case studies. And today, actually, we are very happy because we would like to take the opportunity of this webinar to launch our brand new report, which is on policy instruments on product lifetime extension, relevant policies that countries have in place or aspire to for addressing product lifetime extension. And this is what I will be sharing with you very briefly before we go into the discussion today. The next one, please. Thank you. So essentially, the report the report provides an overview of, diverse policies and regulatory approaches for product lifetime extension across the globe. So the idea of this project was to provide an illustration of the main instruments and initiatives through which some countries have promoted the topic of product lifetime extension. It does not aim to be, exhaustive mapping or list of all types of policies that have been discussed or, applied around the world, because this would be, not possible under the limits of this project specifically. But we did try to come up with a list of a comprehensive list of different types of policies that have been applied on product lifetime extension in many countries around the world. And I'll be sharing with you a little bit more on that, and you'll be also able to download the report yourself from today. The next one, please. Thanks. So what we saw is that a variety of different policy measures has been applied to enhance the useful life of product worldwide from many different countries. And basically this variety is mainly due to the fact that, of course, policy measures are generally designed to tackle different roots of the problem. So overall, in the report, we categorize these policies into two broader categories. So we have the upstream policies, which are the ones who promote strategies during the design phase of a product. For example, policies that address needs for minimum product lifetimes, and the promotion of modularity to facilitate replacement by the user. So these would be upstream policies. And also we've called the downstream policies, which are the policies that aim to stimulate strategies during maintenance and prolonged use. So for example, policies to inform consumers or stakeholders in general about the expected lifetime of a product in order then to facilitate informed choice, informed use, and in some cases, informed disposal. The next one, please. Thank you. So the most common policy measures that we found in the research are regulation against planned obsolescence, minimum durability criteria, extended product warranty, product repairability, and also policies that address, consumer education, consumer rights, consumer protection, and information policies. The next one, please. Thank you. And this is, you can just go back one slide. I just included a picture, a screenshot basically from the publication for you to understand how the publication is structured. So basically we have a section for each of these types of policies, and then you can basically click on the links, on the hyperlinks that you provided in the document, and these go to usually direct legislation websites, and then you can get more information, usually of course in the country's language. But we try to include a summary of all the policies that we could map in this report. Okay, the next one, please. Thank you. And in terms of very quickly on key findings and conclusions that we could brought from this mapping, we saw that, of course, PLE, product lifetime extension, can be promoted by, I mean, not only one, but a variety of policy options. And the nature of the regulatory and policy landscape relevant for this topic is usually specific on national contexts. Engagement in creating and promoting such policies has been increasing over the last 2 decades, but we notice that more policy attention still needs to be directed to the design and use phases of products, particularly if we talk about certain product categories, for example, textiles, because the majority of policies covered in this report target or address electronic products and white goods. So this is something that we noticed when we had this review of policies, and also, of course, the fact that one size fits all horizontal policy approach, which means that a policy approach that could cover all types of product categories is unlikely to be appropriate, because, of course, different policy measures are suitable to different product categories at different times. So this is something that we should definitely take into account, and also, I mean, that I bring to our discussion here. So the next one, please. Thank you. And in terms of the role of consumer information here, we bring the point that policies are very relevant and important and maybe crucial, but policies alone might not be enough to be to reach consumers widely. So that's why voluntary instruments and also efficient communication tools, what we call consumer information tools, they are still needed to strengthen consumer awareness on how they could, on how consumers could engage in product lifetime extension strategies. And this assumption is based on the rationale that if consumers have better information, they are able to make better decisions. The next one, please. Thank you. So the final report is already available on the One Planet Network website. We just uploaded this webinar this morning. We invite you to share this report with your networks, and please reach out to us in case you miss any relevant policy that you are aware of and that we could include. So as I had said in the beginning, this at this point is not meant to be an extensive or exhaustive list of policies around the world, but we do want to continue mapping all the relevant policies. So if you are aware of any other policies that we could include in our report, please reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to include that in the near future. The next one, please. Thank you. So this is just to let you know that all the resources that I mentioned, including this new report, are available on what we call the Product Lifetime Extension Hub. You can see the link there, and you're going to receive the publication, the presentation material afterwards. So that's it from my side now. Thank you very much for those of you who are already including some questions in the chat box. We are going to come back to the questions afterwards in the discussions, okay? And now I'm happy to invite Nabil Nasser from International Resource Panel. Let's just understand how we are going to do with the presentation. Marina, I don't know if you've got Nabil's presentation already, or?
Yes, I do. I'll just pause here a little bit, and I'll come back with the presentation. Just 1 second.
Okay, sure. You can stop your video if you want, and then you can.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to this very important topic and very informative introduction. So I am, you know, as was mentioned, I'm a member of the International Resource Panel, and I'm going to present a quick overview of a 3-year-long study that was done under the International Resource Panel. Focused primarily on the value retention processes And it's a kind of a term that kind of tried to coin in this report, and hopefully the slides will come here shortly. The study basically was conducted in 4 countries: 2 developed countries, Germany and the US, and 2 developing countries, China and Brazil. So the study actually looked into a lot of data related to 3 sectors: automotive, heavy duty, and commercial printers. Those are very high cost, sophisticated commercial printers that are used in the business world. And the work was actually done based on a lot of factors that we looked at. And I don't see the slides yet. Is that okay? Let's see here. So the work was actually.
Marina, sorry, Nabil. Sorry, I'm sorry. Marina, we can see your screen, but not the slides. Yeah, we can see your screen, but not the slides, Marina. So perhaps you stop sharing and then you change.
Yeah, I will stop sharing and change. Just one second.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, perfect. Now we can see it, but we can see, yes.
Right, that's good. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the focus of the study was really related to circular economy and what kind of activities or recommendation that can be made to enhance circular economy practices. And one of the things that we actually had to look at initially, that really the focus of circular economy is to maximize system efficiencies, the resources that we consume to make product and services, and also the value retention of those resources to ensure that we're using them as long as we can. And that's where we actually focus on the value retention processes, which include basically the reuse, refurbishment, and remanufacturing. And obviously that has significant benefits in terms of resource efficiency, circular economy, and reduce the negative impact on the environment. I just want to say that in general, extending product life has great benefit, but it's not always the case. So it has to be looked at carefully to make sure that what we're extending its life is actually is desirable to do that. So there are many factors have to be considered. And the reason for the study was really to inform policy and also provide guidance to the private sector. And next slide, please. So the study was a 3-year-long study, and one of the things that we discovered at the beginning, and I apologize, this looks like an eye chart here for you, but one of the things that we had to come to conclusion on is early on is that the distinction between a lot of processes. We have 9 different processes that fall under the category of repair to refurbishment to full remanufacturing, and there are many terms used in different parts of the world related to that. And we wanted to distinguish between processes that are factory-based operation, where the product gets back to a factory operation processes, standardized processes, and the processes are used typically in intermediate repair operation or in a repair operation, for example. So the 3 at the top, which is making the product brand new, we call it the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. Producing a product was certain expected life cycle. And then you go to remanufacturing, which is also a factory-based operation using standard processes. And if it is done correctly, you expect that product to, once it reaches end of life, actually go into multiple life cycles depending on the product itself. Sometimes we can go to 4 or 5 life cycle for the same system, like a diesel engine or something like that. And that remanufacturing basically allow for this life cycle to be extended. The comprehensive refurbishment is another form of also extending the product life cycle. It doesn't equate exactly to remanufacturing, and there is a lot of discussion on that in the report that we issued under UNEP. And now we have the direct reuse, the repair and refurbishment that are done in typically intermediate repair operation. And we just wanted to distinguish between those processes just to make sure that as we conduct the study, things are very clear to the reader. Next page, please. So this is another attempt to actually, for the first time, we're trying, and this is all you have to worry about is at the bottom here, which is the input material to production. So as we look into production, and the way we do things typically is we look at virgin material going into production to make product. And here for the first time, actually, we're looking at the material flow in production and making product. And we're taking the imported cores. Core is the end-of-life product that we take back, and that can be imported or can be domestic as well. And also looking at recycled material content. So for the first time, we're actually looking at all of those inputs to satisfy our need for new product or for production. And that was very important for us to consider a lot of those value retention processes and the cores that we bring back as part of that material flow. So obviously the production here can be brand new, was all virgin material, as well as also remanufactured or comprehensive refurbishments. Go to the next slide. So the study that was conducted over a 3-year period looked into 3 categories, and the reason we selected those categories because they are established categories in the value retention processes world. Many of the other product categories, either these processes do not exist or in the early stage of development. There is another study that I'm conducting now with 17 of my colleagues at IRP and others, focused primarily on consumer electronics as an industry that has a big impact. And we're trying to look at value retention processes in the sector and look into in a very objective fashion into the option that we have in this area, and giving the fact that this industry is different, and also the fast the change in technology in this industry. So we identified the case studies, we identified industry collaborators, we developed a very, what we call it, a bottom-up approach. So we develop a significant data sets to allow us to do the analysis based on very solid data and not based on perception. And we had to validate every single data point that we collected. We did the analysis on many product samples in this area, and we compared basically, and the goal here is not to say that value retention processes were very desirable and it's important to promote it. The goal here is to have a very objective study to identify the trade-offs and the value, and without having any bias in doing the analysis. So we looked into the material requirements for production, we looked into embodied energy, and we looked into embodied carbon and the process energy as well, and process emission, and we looked into the cost advantage of the value retention processes, and also we looked into the employment opportunity that this industry provides versus the typical approaches. Next slide, please. So this here is a very, very simple analysis of some of the data that we collected from one of the sectors that we studied, which is the digital industrial printers. Those are typically large digital machines that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of value. If you take a look at the right-hand side, you would see that blue bar here that represent making the product brand new virgin material. And you can see here the process waste associated with that as well next to it. Now, if you compare that to remanufacturing, because we're able to utilize many of the components that come back when the product come back at end of use, you would see the significant reduction in material use, significant reduction in the need for new material to make this product, because we do reutilize many of the material that come back. And obviously that also would result in less waste from the process. Comprehensive refurbishment is less than remanufacturing, and also it doesn't provide a full life cycle as we expect in remanufacturing. In the left-hand side, you can see here that the first 4 bars related to the embodied energy and related to the process energy and related to the emission associated with the production of brand new product. And you can see here the biggest issue here is the energy consumption needed to make those products brand new. If you compare it to the next 4 bars, those are related to making the product or remanufacturing the product. You can see here significant reduction in all of those, and clearly when you see the material consumption, you can see what contributes to that much lower impact doing that in remanufacturing. And refurbishment isn't that far off from remanufacturing here in this regard. So you can see here clearly significant advantage in this area. Next slide, please. So we actually looked into some example. Brazil was one of the countries that we actually looked at, and we looked into several scenarios. One is in the digital industrial printers. We looked into business as usual, which is the status quo. We looked into a scenario where basically standard open market, compared it. There are some restrictions in different countries, and we compared it to the best case scenario in terms of open market, and what the results would do in terms of, and you can see here the blue, which is a lion's share of the impact related to material consumption, and obviously it has associated emission and as well as energy consumption. And we looked into the third scenario, was really looking at the theoretical high. If you eliminate all the barriers and you ensure that the sector is able to compete in making those products as we do in making new product, and if you eliminate all the barriers, what the impact would be. And you can see here clearly that the saving, this bar here showing the significant saving in material consumption that we would receive versus versus the status quo. So all of those charts showing the value that we actually gain by eliminating the barriers, which we discussed in the report. Next slide, please. So this here is a quick summary. It's hard to summarize a 3-year-long study with so many factors that we consider. But you can see here countries that we compared, and this is done based on very objective analysis. One of the major things, and you can see that as you consider a lot of options in this area, the regulatory and market access barriers are a key to success in this industry. And if there are barriers there, nothing else matters. So this is the most important element that would encourage or facilitate more work in the value retention processes. And if there are restrictions, simply it doesn't matter what else you got. It's basically you blocked this industry from growing. There's beyond that, there is technical barriers, there are market barriers, and there is recovery barriers, ability to bring the product back effectively, economically at the end of life. You can see here that the differences in color. You can see here in China, for example, where there are many regulatory and market access barriers for remanufacturing and value retention processes. There are a lot of changes now, and in many countries, including China. At the time of the study, that was definitely seen as a major barriers. There is also a lot of market barriers for people perceiving the product to be high quality and worthy of purchasing. Brazil also had similar challenges, even though selectively in certain areas the barrier were less. So the study actually looked carefully at all of those factors in the sectors that we studied. And you can see here from the color coding here, you can see that in all cases, we call it market transformation in terms of getting people aware of the value of the value retention processes and the value of the product is lacking in general. Next slide, please. So this table here just summarizes some of the barriers, and I will not get into a lot of those details. So the first one is really the regulatory and access barriers. As I mentioned, this seem to be a huge barrier that while we sell product around the globe from many markets and many areas, the ability to bring the product back, to bring the core back, the ability to sell product that are remanufactured or refurbished is definitely a challenge, and those regulatory barriers extend around the globe in many countries. The other factor is the collection infrastructure barriers, and the third one is again, the market barrier where the market perception and the consumer perception of the product. If you have the best product that you remanufacture, refurbish, and the market isn't willing to buy it, then you still have a lot of challenges in this area. The technological barriers also are significant to ensure that we're able to get the product back to like new conditions. So a lot of those are interconnected. If we're unable to show that the product is meeting all the desirable specifications, the market also is not going to be willing to buy those products. Next slide, please. So from a policy recommendation, I just summarized several of those categories here very quickly, but clearly in this area, in the U.S., we always say that we like to have less regulation, less policy, and when we deal with the industrial world, in this area specifically, it definitely needs more support and more thoughtful regulations to ensure that this industry is able to thrive and the practices continue to grow. There's definitely significant advantage that the study identified, and the importance is in order to do that, in order to achieve the goals of the value retention processes and realize the value, it's very important to also ensure that there is policy directives that are assisting in reaching our goals. So you can see here, the open market access to VRP product is recognized as a major factor, that because we have uneven rules around the globe, we have different complications in the system in different countries that make it difficult for companies, for industry to actually tackle or able to remanufacture many product, because the ability to sell it back or the ability to collect even the core back. There's a huge challenge also with the waste definition that keep changing, and many times it's not intentionally designed to basically be unproductive to the remanufacturing and refurbishment industry, but in reality it does. So I think that's where we have a lot of challenges getting the core back and also selling the product back in many of those markets. The technology focus is very important to ensure that as many governments around the globe support research for new product production, new materials, new technologies, it's important also to have investment in technology for VRPs, because typically that isn't the case in a lot of countries. Also, the environmental focus, emphasizing the continuous improvement and customer engagement in this area is definitely very important to ensure that we actually have a complete set of positive requirements in this area. There is also the government also have the ability to lead by example by ensuring that they can acquire and they open their doors for buying VRP products to show that to encourage companies to produce product. Government, for example, in the U.S. has significant purchasing power. So being a leader in actually eliminating some of the barriers to acquiring many of those equipment can be very helpful to encourage this industry to grow. So those were some of the recommendations that were made. But the bottom line, I think, is that the study have shown very clearly in those product categories that there is significant value. As I mentioned earlier, market access and ensuring that the VRP product are once proven to meet the quality and reliability expected, meeting the specification, and ensuring that when this product are made in a very good fashion, those products should not have the restrictions that they have today, and that would help this product categories to grow and also the society to benefit from that. So this is my last slide, and again, I am glad I had the chance to speak about this topic. And as I mentioned before, we're doing similar study on consumer electronics, also from many countries around the globe, and hopefully we'll have that done in a short time. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nabil, for this very enlightening and super rich presentation. Thank you very much. I saw that we do have some questions already for you, but we are gonna hold that questions for the discussion time, if that's okay. But again, thank you. That's a pleasure to have you here with us today. So now we are gonna go to our second intervention from Siddharth Prakash from Akatu Institute. Originally, he would be able to advance his slide himself because there is loads of animated elements, but unfortunately, this will not be possible today. So we're gonna try and make our best with his slides. So Marina, if you could just perhaps you stop your video now and then you'll share your screen with Siddharth's presentation. That would be very much appreciated. So Sid, the floor is yours. I don't know if you prefer to wait until your presentation comes up or if you wanna start perhaps presenting yourself.
Okay,
that would be
great.
good.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks, Fernanda. You can hear me well, right?
Yes, we
Okay,
do.
great. Yeah, so thanks a lot for inviting, for giving this presentation in today's meeting. And I'm really glad to be talking about 3 pillars of product lifetime extension strategies, which need to be considered so that the strategies are effective. I mean, generally, all of us, I would say that at least today's, who are participating today in the meeting, agree that we need to extend the lifetime of products. It's quite clear because of the environmental concerns, circular economy, recovery of resources, etc. So there is no disagreement on that. But the thing is that these 3 pillars, the technical, the legal, and the consumer perspectives, if they are not thought integratively, so if they are working in aloof, isolated spaces, we might not be able to come up with effective strategies for product lifetime extension, because there are several trade-offs. There are technical barriers, there are consumer perspectives which need to be considered, and there are, of course, legal options. So what I will just try to do is to raise some questions also from the experience we have in this department, and I just hope that we can have a kind of a heated, stimulated debate after that. So you can move to the next slide, Marina. So before I start, I just wanted to highlight this fact that when we talk about empowering the consumers, it's not only about consumer information for better decisions. We know that we are operating in a consumer information program of One Planet Network. So this is, of course, a strong focus, and this is extremely important, better consumer information for better decisions. But for consumer empowerment, there is another element, and which is a certain level of minimum consumer protection that has to be there so that the consumers within their possibilities of taking better informed decisions are able to take the right decisions. So we need both better consumer information, but minimum consumer protection measures that are in place, which help consumers in taking the right decisions. So the next point, please. So these are the three perspectives I'll be talking about. So starting with the consumer perspective. Next point, please. So what we should not overlook when we talk about the consumer perspective is the price sensitivity of consumers. We know that purchase price is the most important factor when consumer take decisions to buy products. And of course, we know that lots of surveys indicate that consumers are willing to pay higher prices, for instance, for products which have better quality, which are environmental friendly, which are more durable. But our research has also shown that this willingness to pay increases only to a certain degree. So it's not like there's a linear increase in the willingness to pay higher prices, better the products get. So there is a kind of, let's say, a threshold up to which certain consumer groups are not really ready to pay even a higher price for even better product. This needs to be kept in mind because there is an economic rationale behind this of saving costs, and it has always to be traded with this, let's say, the moral burden of doing the right thing from the perspective of environmental protection. And where there's no prizes in guessing, that in many cases the economic rationale wins. So that's why we know that lots of surveys which indicate that, well, consumers are environmentally aware and are ready to bear the cost of better products. They do not the results do not really reflect the state of the market of sustainable products in terms of the market share. So next point, please. We should know that the consumers are not a homogeneous entity with respect to satisfaction with lifetimes, and I think we should avoid this general perception that consumers are always unsatisfied with product lifetimes. Our research has also shown that there is more or less an equal share of consumers which is satisfied and not satisfied with the lifetimes, and that survey was done for several products like the televisions, washing machines, notebooks, but also water cookers. And yeah, as I said, there was an equal share of consumers satisfied and not satisfied with the lifetimes. We do not know the reasons yet. So it's possible that the share which was satisfied with the lifetimes was the group of consumers who already bought durable devices, so their expectations was met. But it's also possible that consumers paid low price for a cheap product and somehow mentally were quite happy that, well, even though they paid a cheap product, it lasted for a certain amount of years, which actually is justified because of the low price. So this is something we need to keep at the back of our mind. Next point, please. We know that it's not necessary that more information always lead to better results. We know that there is an increasing interest in consumers to know more about the product environmental characteristics. That's for sure. But we also know from the research that too much information at the point of sale for the products doing the online shopping can be overwhelming. And we know the examples of several consumer information apps, for instance, that have been developed in the past, who have tried to compile a lot of information together to give more information to consumers. And we know that that has not always led to let's say, better informed decisions in terms of buying better environmental friendly products. So, and we also know that the information needs differ for different product groups. So for household goods, possibly energy efficiency is one of the key indicators for purchasing, but that might not be the case, for example, for televisions or for smartphones. So next point, please. So important is to have a precise, selective, and impactful information for consumers so that they can take the right decision. And I mean, just taking the example of the success of energy label in the EU, we know that energy efficiency scale information has had a very large impact on how consumers have changed their behavior towards purchase of energy efficient products. So that information is very clear, precise, and selective, and can easily be understood. Next point. So translating this information to the topic of lifetime extension, there is, of course, the instrument of lifetime labeling, which has been discussed for quite a while, and it's still being discussed. And from the technical perspective, we need to understand that there is a difference between the statistical lifetime and the lifetime of each individual product which is purchased by the consumer. And I think I saw in the list of the participant that Anton Bergwald is also there from Fraunhofer IZM, so probably he can also talk about his research in this field. So we know that statistical lifetimes, I mean, it is a common practice in product development to measure them, because in order to improve the reliability of the products, improve the safety of the products, the durability, etc. And there are several statistical parameters which are used to determine the statistical lifetimes: mean time to failure, mean time between failures, etc., etc. It needs to be understood that statistical lifetimes always allow a certain failure rate, because this is part and parcel of product development, that even though products might be designed to be highly reliable, there is always a small chance that products do not perform to a certain degree, or a small share of products do not perform to a certain degree as it was intended. So it is important to understand this concept of statistical lifetimes, because they do not or would not impose civil law obligations on manufacturers if that lifetime is provided as a consumer information on the packaging, for instance, and if it does not correspond to the consumer expectation under a certain user behavior, because yeah, this is a statistical information and not the information which consumer might have been expecting, that a certain information, lifetime information is given to the packaging, so that under my user conditions, it is 100% sure that this lifetime will be achieved. No, it will not be the case. So so it could lead to consumer dissatisfaction because the civil law obligations in this case would not apply. Linking consumer expectation with civil law obligation of manufacturers, if we do that, it will have certain trade-off, because it's possible that manufacturers then may not be interested in extending the lifetimes of their products in order to avoid risks of getting imposed with these civil law obligations. So what it may happen is that if this let's say value of the lifetime, which is exactly meeting the consumer expectation in terms of the civil law obligations of manufacturers, is too high, then the manufacturer, or it's planned to be too high, there will be a, it's quite expected that the manufacturers will, or the industry will not be very keen on working in this direction, and possibly they would lose incentives to develop better quality products, because in order to avoid risks to the market, to the turnover, for instance. So it may happen that there's a risk that on average low lifetimes are established in the market. This needs to be kept in mind. And we know that if the values are very high, then it needs to be tested. And we know that this testing of higher lifetimes is very tedious and time consuming. If you are testing a washing machine which is supposed to last for 15 years, you can imagine that a lifetime test also under accelerated condition might run for several months, if not for more than a year. So the next point, which also needs to be understood, is that durable products with high lifetimes would generally be associated with a somewhat higher environmental burden during production, because we know that, of course, the overall impact would be lower in terms of environment. This is quite clear, and we have a general agreement on that. But for the production of durable devices, for example, extra connectors would have to be used for modularity, better quality material, robust material. It involves costs. So, but if this technical lifetime of the higher durable products is not matching the real use time, because the innovations are happening in the market, because consumers always want new products, then what may happen is that durable products with higher technical lifetime may lead to overall higher impact if they are not used for that whole technical lifetime. Next point, please. There is another instrument of the manufacturer's warranties, which is voluntary at this point of time, and there are proposals to introduce a mandatory guarantee of durability. And I also saw in the participant list that Isabel from European Consumer Organization, BOEC, is there, and they're doing some good work on this regard. So maybe they can also give some input later on in the discussion. So there is a possibility to make it as a mandatory statement, or even the possibility to set minimum values, because it's an instrument which is already out there, but a voluntary instrument. So it needs to be kept in mind that because here now the civil law obligation will apply on the manufacturer, targeting the rights of all individual customers to claim non-conformities. So it's not a statistical lifetime or something, but it's the guarantee which is provided by the manufacturer. And it can be also seen as a proxy for the lifetime, because it gives a kind of an indication of the quality of the product, which the product or the lifetime which the product's supposed to last. It will be lower than the average lifetimes, because the average lifetime is the average of the market. So you have products with higher lifetimes and lower lifetimes, and average products are designed considering more or less average user behavior. So the guarantees are given by the manufacturers, not knowing how the product will actually be used in the real life conditions. So it will be lower than, possibly lower than the average lifetimes. But this is an instrument, and this is also what our research has shown, an instrument which is understood very, very well by the consumers and also embraced in terms of taking purchase decisions. Next point, please. So when it comes to the mandatory guarantee or guarantee as an instrument, it is something which is very selective, very precise and easily understood. That could be one of the instruments to guide consumer decisions. Next point. And the other point is, which is also mentioned in the report of the One Planet Network, which is published now, is the possibility of introducing a kind of a durability or repairability index, looking at the example of what France did early this year. It is something which may have a similar effect to the energy label, but it's also much easier to implement because a lot of legal issues which are related to the points which we just discussed, which I just presented, might not be so relevant there, because there are a number of factors that go in there in terms of spare parts availability, prices for spare parts, robustness, statistical lifetimes, disassembly times, etc. So that could be something which is easily understood by consumers. Next point. What we know and what we also need require is the minimum durability requirement in order to protect consumers from really cheap or bad quality products. So that's something which could be seen as also something like minimum product lifetime requirements. But of course, these are the requirements which are something which may not necessarily be perceived or seen by consumers at the point of sale, but this is something which can be verified, for example, by market surveillance authorities, which is also a kind of a practice which is already in place for some product groups within the EU Eco-Design Directive. For example, for vacuum cleaners, where the motors are supposed to last for more than 500 hours, hoses for 40,000 oscillations, the battery endurance, and also with LEDs and OLEDs, their endurance tests, and a certain number of devices are not expected to fail after a certain level of usage has been achieved. So these are already used and can be verified by market surveillance authorities. The advantage is that it builds on the on the existing product design practices, principles, measurements of the industry. So statistical parameters like the B10 values or other statistical parameters can already be used, of course, with predefined standards that need to be presented and that need to be shown by the industry if asked by the market surveillance authorities. Okay, moving to the last section in terms of the other instruments, I think we have the instrument of the legal guarantees in the EU, for instance, and many other countries also have this instrument, which is given by the seller of the product. In the EU, the minimum is 2 years, but there are also countries like the Norway and Iceland who have higher legal guarantee time periods. For example, 5 years. In Sweden, it's 3 years. The thing is that for durable goods like household goods, but televisions, consumer electronics, we know that this 2-year minimum period, what we have in EU, is just too low, because it is not clear to the consumers, for instance, if the defect in terms of if the defect was present at the time of the delivery of the the product or not, because a defect may be visible after 2 years, for instance, for durable goods, which is common. So a washing machine can show a certain defect after 2.5 years, but then this period is gone. So it's difficult for consumers to exercise their non-conformity claim. So it's better to have for durable goods extended length of legal guarantees for exercising non-conformity claims. So the next point is related to the reversal of burden of proof, which is currently 6 months in the EU. So in the first 6 months, the burden of proof lies with the seller of the product to show that the product was defect-free. And but some countries have increased it much longer to protect consumers. For example, in France, this is a case that this period has been extended to 2 years, but it can even be longer, and it can also be as long as, for example, the length of the legal guarantee for non-conformity claims. So, but it can also be similar to the time period, for example, which is being given by the manufacturer as a guarantee. So in this case, what we will have is the joint liability from producer and seller at the same time. That's better for the consumers, for the consumer rights, because then they have two partners where they can claim their non-conformity rights. And including the producer as the partner for non-conformity claims is important, because the producer is the one who has the maximum information and knowledge about the product. So all these measures would definitely lead to increasing the quality or the durability of the product, because then otherwise the costs have to be paid by the manufacturer. Last point is related to minimum requirements when it comes, for example, to repair and maintenance. So it goes in the direction of the right to repair and independent access to independent repair sector for repair and maintenance information, to spare parts, to tools, etc. And there it's important that it's clearly decided what are non-negotiables, so that not everything is moved in the, for example, in the repairability or durability index, because then there are some very important factors that may get lost in an overall score or index, which are possibly just too important in order to promote, for example, better repairs. For example, minimum length of spare parts availability. So we should always decide on the non-negotiables. It could, for example, be disassembly of certain components to facilitate repairs. And the repairability index, for instance, could be something which is going beyond these minimum requirements. So so this needs to be kept in mind, that we do not pass all the burden of taking the decisions to the consumers with the repairability index as well, but rather have some minimum requirements that have to be met by everyone in the market. So and final point of the slide is next point, that we need both durability and repairability requirements, because we know that in order to counter obsolescence, because we know that, for example, taking the examples of the EU, if you only promote repair, and it will always be the case that the repairs are more expensive than buying new devices after the devices have been used for certain years for the consumers. And again, this economic rationale comes into the picture. So it's important that there is a kind of a appreciation of the products in terms of the value which is paid by the consumers while purchasing the products. So that means if you buy the durable products, they will be a bit more expensive in costs because of high materials, etc. But what will happen is that durable products normally also come with better service, better maintenance, spare part availability, etc., which at the end of the day also would lead to reduction in repair costs, because they would not be then so high compared to the prices of new devices. So it has to be both ways, durable and repairability, to counter obsolescence. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sid, for this presentation. That was very helpful for us to move forward, because then you talked about how to link these three different perspectives: legal, technical, and the consumer perspective. And then moving forward, I'm happy to invite David Fitzsimmons. He will be talking us through some of the barriers and challenges from the business perspective. So after we've heard from Nabil from the policy perspective, and then this very enlightening presentation also from Sid, linking also the different types of frameworks and perspectives. So now we are happy to go through some of the business challenges on the topic. So David, I guess we will be advancing the slides for you as well, right? We already have your slides here, so that should be start soon. And I give you the floor then. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Fernanda. And good day to everybody out there participating. I promised to do 10 minutes taking a business perspective on this issue. And that by business, I mean those businesses that are practicing remanufacturing or refurbishment. So a few words to explain the perspective that I'm going to bring to this discussion. A few words about the Conseil Européen de la Manufacture, which is based in Brussels. We're a membership organisation, members only for companies who either remanufacture or refurbish at any size across any product category. And we include trade association members as well. And our aim is to get from an estimate of 30 billion in sales in Europe to 100 billion in sales by 2030 for this sector of product life extension through industrial scale refurbishment and remanufacture. So as Nabil, I thought, very well outlined, the key issue, if that is your aim as an organisation, is about the framework of regulations in which businesses compete. And if that isn't right, there's no hope at all of getting from 30 billion to 100 billion in Europe. And I thought Nabil made that case far better than I could. I'm going to say a few words which are falling into 4 categories. The remarks that I'll make today will fall under 1, about the business models that are used by remanufacturing businesses and the implications. Secondly, a major common issue across almost all of the sectors that are remanufacturing at the moment, which I think has to be addressed, policy terms. The third area is about business to consumer products, only representing about 10% at the moment of the remanufacturing and refurbishment, but important, and I'll say something about that. And then finally, the regulatory reviews that are currently underway, which I think could be very helpful and which I'm going to point at. So let's start, next slide, please. Let's start with this summary slide borrowed from Linköping University, who I've got a lot of time for in this area. It's a very crowded slide, but what it communicates is just how many product categories are currently put through some form of industrial process for remanufacture or refurbishment. So multiple products in multiple sectors. But on the right-hand side of the slide, I've highlighted the 3 main business models that are used. And this is important because very often examples and case studies are given of excellent examples of remanufacturing or refurbishment, but without clear understanding of why that's a good example and what the drivers are for the businesses that are doing it. And they're very different. So unless we're clear about that, we can end up with some rather complicated, getting confused about what we are trying to understand. So firstly, business model where the OEM is bringing back their own product for remanufacture. And of course, we always hear about Caterpillar because they're a leading example for many years in this area. But you'll also find the same business model used in the defense sector. Or for example, you might use, bearings, a good example there with SKF. And there, the idea of the value retention process, the driver for that business model is to keep value in a process where the company very often is continuing to own the product. The second business model is where the OEM has appointed an approved third party to do the remanufacturing to their specification. A good example there might be Atlas Copco in the industrial compressor market, and then they use their approved contractor, Originaire. And there, what's driving that motivation, what's driving that business is client retention and a rapid response in time for that client. Lexmark is an example of that in a more of a consumer product area, where they appoint Syncreon to carry out the work for the remanufacturing of their printer cartridges and imaging devices. And then finally, there's this group called independents, and they typically are SMEs. They're not the larger companies you find in groups 1 and 2. And it's very important to recognize that very few of these meetings will you find the views of the independents expressed. Very few people will speak up for the independents. And why? Well, principally because you'll find that some independents are competing directly with groups 1 and 2. They're trying to get the same feedstock, and they're competing on the basis of being local, having a lower price, being faster than the OEM approved model. But there's a second category whom I think we need to be particularly conscious of, and that is those who discover the new opportunities, the independents who discover that there's an opportunity to extend the life of products, to retain value in them, and they're often directly at war with the OEM, who absolutely does not want to see their product life extended. And there, I think we've got two different categories of policy interventions that are required. Those that would give some protection to the independents and to encourage competition in that area. And on the other, a category of policy that would encourage more activity by the OEMs, borrowing the models that are already active. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. The thing to say here is we're going to move on to a big issue that's affecting almost all of the sectors that are remanufacturing. And there's if this is not addressed, I think there will be a tendency towards a reduction in product life extension across many categories in the future. What I'm talking about is that increasingly as traditional electromechanical products have embedded digital services attached to them in one form or another. There is a very large category of activities, but essentially the digitization of those products makes them functionally far better. But after the end of first use, what is happening is that very often there's a denial of access to the continued access to the digital services. Now, you'll know that the right to repair movement has highlighted that for consumer products around the world, complained about it, but don't imagine that it's only relating to consumer products. You'll find many industrial products where this is also true. And that's, for example, from railway locomotives at one end of the market, right the way through to imaging equipment at the other. So we have to address that issue because it's so obviously being used at the moment to shorten life of products. And I think in many cases, it is essentially an expression of market power. So, and market power is, it's an issue in many different markets. How do you address it? Well, I think it's often through competition policy that we have to approach that issue. Or as Siddharth, I think you did an excellent presentation on the very knotty problem of consumer products, where I think there's a more balanced approach required with a trend towards, with an effort to try to push at the existing positive trend in consumer acceptance of more remanufactured or refurbished products. Next slide. And so finally, I wanted to just highlight a process that's underway at the moment of reviewing regulations in order to build in circular economy aspects. And it is fascinating for two reasons. The EU process that's underway is identifying one, silence, gaps, where nothing is said. But secondly, often some very subtle clauses which frustrate competition and frustrate market entry in the way that Nabil described. An example of that, I think, comes under the Product Liability Directive 85374. In a very small way, it's possible for, under Article 7, Clause B or Clause E, for an OEM to simply say that our responsibility under the Product Liabilities Directive can be removed because a refurbisher or a remanufacturer opens the product. Now, on one level, that's acceptable, but on another, you can understand that that's a disincentive and leads to all sorts of legal challenges. So I think the EU process is well worth watching. The rewriting of the Blue Guide, for example, that is the redrafting of the Blue Guide that controls the way products that have a CE marking sold into the single market, includes the circular economy, worth watching that. And of course, the Developing Sustainable Products Initiative proposal. And then one other area I would look at would be just looking at what Canada is starting to do at the moment in remanufacturing. There's a new report just published. Have a look at www.remancan.com and to see where perhaps the Canadians are going to go, are having led in this area during the G7 process, looking at value retention processes. So in essence, what's this presentation been about? I'd say, firstly, we can win here if our objective is to encourage more competition, better value for money at the highest level of drivers. Secondly, look at the policies to incentivize OEMs to adopt those two big business models I highlighted at the beginning, but understand that the policies to help independents are likely to lead to objections from some of those OEMs, and most importantly, many of the others who do not want to see product life extension. And then I think finally, I agree with what's been said so far in the need for balance for consumer products, especially. There's a much more knotty problem, but the good news there is there's definitely a trend towards consumer acceptance in this area, which I'd be happy to say more about in the Q&A session. Thank you all very much indeed. I hope that's helpful.
That's absolutely helpful. Thank you very much for the presentation, David. That fit very well into the other presentations that we already saw. Thank you very much for that. And now, without much ado, I will call Helio Matar and give you the floor, Helio. So we can, after Helio's presentation, we can directly start our Q&A. So thank you very much. I guess then Marina will perhaps stop the video now and also upload Helio's presentation again. So thank you very much, Helio. I'll give you the floor if you want to start introducing yourself while Marina's just uploading your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, Fernanda and Marina. It is a pleasure for Akatu to be a partner with One Planet Network Consumer Information Program and the working group on product lifetime extension, and especially in this webinar. I want to compliment Fernanda and Marina for the invitations made to a group of experts which are not only very competent, but complementary in terms of the information and the points they brought to discussion. My presentation relates to the consumer side of the product lifetime extension in terms of barriers and benefits. And I will, next slide, please. We'll first present very briefly Akatu Institute, who we are, what we do. Next slide, please. So Akatu was created 20 years ago. It's a non-profit NGO, and we work to mobilize population towards sustainability practices through conscious consumption. We define conscious consumption as being a consumption with better impact, especially from the point of view of the environment and society. So it means to consume better, to consume differently, to avoid excess and waste, and to lead the consumer to contribute to sustainability, which we like to define as being to allow sufficient well-being for everybody forever. And the word Akatu is a very beautiful word in the Indian language here in Brazil. A means seed and world, the A, and Katu means good and better. So Akatu means at the same time good seed and better world. So that's what we try to help consumers to be good seeds for a better world through their acts of consumption, buying, using, and discarding products and services. The next slide, please. Akatu works in education, in communication. In communication, we work with social networks, in advertising, with the traditional media, and in education, we work in schools, doing capacity building with teachers and students, in community with capacity building of leaders of communities as multipliers, and in companies, working with the leadership of companies, and also doing the capacity building of multipliers to take conscious consumption and sustainability to all the employees. And we use for that a set of elements, contents, pedagogies, research metrics, games, dynamics, and methodologies that we ourselves developed and tested along the years, and which are very capable, very effective in terms of changing consumer behavior. Next, please. Next. And these are the supporters of Akatu, foundations and companies. In total, we've had, along the 20 years, almost 100 companies working with us in mobilizing consumers towards conscious consumption. Next one, please. So now talking about the planned obsolescence, which is so key to PLE. Let me show you a curiosity. Next one, please. A lamp that never went out since 1901 for over 120 years in the Livermore Fire Department. There is a webcam that has been filming the lamp for a few years now, 24 hours a day. Twice the webcam had to be replaced, but the lamp has been on and on and on as usual for more than 120 years. Next, please. So it is totally possible to from a technical standpoint, to make a very, very durable product. But there was a decision in 1924, and this is the first recorded decision on a planned obsolescence by a lamp manufacturers cartel, by Osram, General Electric, Philips, and other companies that met in Geneva and decided to reduce the lifetime of incandescent lamps from 2,500 to 1,000 hours. And this was very, of course, a very important milestone in the history of obsolescence, being a formal agreement between the companies. Next one, please. So this agreement was actually used later on to establish the term planned obsolescence by Bernard London in a paper in 1932. The paper was called End Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. During the Depression period, of course, there was a tremendous push in the direction of reducing unemployment and reducing the difficulties in companies. And the planned obsolescence was seen as a solution. Companies would sell more, employees would keep their jobs. And then there was this transformation in the market from consumption being an individual phenomenon, which is necessary to human life, and going towards consumerism, which is an attribute of society, not of the consumer individually, transforming exacerbated consumption in the main driving force of the economy, which makes, of course, as my colleagues already shown, in a many difficulties in driving the economy in a different direction. Next one, please. A preaching for planned obsolescence in the 30s was made by Paul Mazur, a banker in Wall Street, when he said, "We need to change America from a culture of needs to one of wishes. People need to be trained, want new things even before the old ones were consumed. We need to change the mindset in America. Men's desire must overshadow their needs." That's a very clear statement on what obsolescence is and the need to change the consumer mind in that same direction, which was done along the years after that. Next one, please. So it's important to say that consumption is not only an individual decision, although many people think so. It is actually a social practice, and let me show that. Next one, please. Companies, governments, NGOs, academy are responsible to make the individual consumption decision to be enabled on the one side or limited by actions of these actors on the other side. Companies have to develop and offer products, have to provide information, governments have to promote public policies that encourage the adoption of sustainable solutions, to offer support for purchasing in terms of regulation, using in terms of regulation, and disposal in terms of infrastructure with better social and environmental impacts, and the NGOs and academy to point out the priority routes to reduce negative externalities, as my colleagues already showed several examples of each one of these. So consciousness in consumption leads to more sustainable buying, using, and discarding decisions, but although a necessary condition, it is insufficient for sustainability. It is required that all other actors in society, companies, governments, NGOs, the academy, to act upon the issue in order to create the conditions, enabling conditions to make PLE, product lifetime extension, a reality for the consumer. Next one, please. So the relation between consumer and the durability of products can be seen as such. Please, the next one. The Longview report published by UNEP in 2017 shows that consumers in Brazil, 66% indicate they would like products to last longer. Consumers in the UK, more than 50% of consumers think that the current availability of products, although it's reasonable, they desire products to last longer. And consumers are shown to feel powerless to change their own behavior or to put pressure on producers. So consumers are saying very clearly, this is not an individual decision, this is a social practice. In the good side of it, RAP for the consumers in UK between 2012 and 2018 showed that repairs on equipment, computers, and household goods increased very significantly in the period of 6 years by 74% as an average. So there is a desire on the consumer, and the consumer is doing it, but it needs help. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Previous one, please. The frequency of healthy and sustainable living behaviors is a research that is done by GlobeScan worldwide nowadays for 2021, 31 countries. We do it every year, and Akatu is the responsible part here in Brazil for the research. And taking the average for 25 countries in 2019, so before the pandemics, 60% of consumers affirmed that if something breaks, I try to repair it instead of buying new, which of course goes in directly in the direction of PLE. And I buy second-hand household items or clothing, 19%. It has to improve, but there are at least 1 in 5 consumers worldwide that are looking for a second-hand household item, which is also a form of PLE. And 24% go in the opposite direction. They buy the least expensive products, even if they will not last, as was explained by some of my colleagues before. The next one, please. So the barriers preventing consumers from choosing the attribute of durability or of extension of life of products are, as I'm going to be described in the next slide, please. Consumer goods companies' business model rely on fast obsolescence, as I mentioned, and as it was presented by my colleagues. And the factors that contribute to the maintenance of this model are that first, consumers are sensitive to companies' advertising appeals. Investors demand for fast return on investment, and fast obsolescence is one way for companies to do it. As a consequence, manufacturers tend to continue to design products to fulfill a planned lifetime. And companies and governments do not facilitate the choice of consumers to extend the life of products. High repair costs, poor technical assistance, difficulty to access spare parts, software updates, lack of diagnostic and tools, lack of updates or inability to install them, fast renewal of fashionable design, and so many other things in regulation and legislation. Next one, please. So to overcome these barriers felt by consumers, each one of the actors in society have to contribute in a certain direction. Next one, please. The first direction for all actors in society, for companies, for governments, for NGOs, and for the economy, is to educate consumers, I'm sorry, to consume differently, starting with children and youth. I think that's a very important point. Children and youth at a very early age are forming their values, and if those values go in the right direction, extension of lifetime of products will be natural in terms of behavior. So what we want is to educate, to change the consumer focus towards the search for products or services that perform the desired function with the best possible impact. So the consumer should reflect on the needs, identify the function to be fulfilled, identify the alternative products or services that are solutions to the fulfillment of such function, and then choose the product or service that fulfills the function with the best possible impact from an economic, social, and environmental point of view. With the consumer educated, be it a child or a youth or an adult, this, as I mentioned before, is a necessary condition, but it is insufficient. What makes it sufficient is the action by the other actors. Next one, please. By the industry in designing products and services aligned to PLE strategies, in NGOs, in pressuring governments and companies towards enabling product lifetime extension, like educating the population, pressuring for the adoption of standards and labeling consistent with PLE, and implementing campaigns directed towards raising the awareness of consumer in relation to the negative impacts of fast obsolescence and the benefits of PLE. Next one, please. In terms of government, to stimulate PLE through regulation and legislation, to induce the industry to benefit from PLE. For instance, in terms of taxes, it's very important legislation that practically avoids PLE to happen, especially difficulty refurbishment and remanufacturing. Right to repair legislation, incentives towards flexible products, designed to accommodate product lifetime extension, and the contribution to the education of children, youth, and the population. And the standard setting organization translating PLA best practices onto standards and certification with minimum criteria for durability, standards for extension of guarantee, labeling for PLE, and public educational campaigns on labeling for PLE. The next one, please. In terms of the benefits to consumers by adhering to PLE, I think that's already very clear, but I'll just mention it briefly. The next one, please. In terms of repair, a financial savings by avoiding the purchase of a new item, restoring energy efficiency through upgrading in remanufactured products to get products with similar or better performance than the new one, and warranty being provided by the market, refurbished product financial savings, and the availability of products no longer sold as new in the market, but that supply all needed features so the consumer can benefit. Second-hand market, availability of cheaper products, access to a wide range of products across multiple platforms, the upcycling that adds value through design and new function, gets unique items, providing unique pieces, and as a general benefit, the availability of products without demanding new natural resources and with much reduced social environmental negative impacts, as my colleagues already have talked about. Next one, please. As a quick example of financial benefit, when we look at smartphone that in average is being used by 1 year, a little bit more than 1 year, could be used for 3 years, there would be a total economy in 3 years of $618 for the consumer that could buy 2 new smartphones with that amount of money. And a notebook that is used in average for 4 years could be used for 7 years as an ideal lifespan. There would be a total economy for $190, sufficient to pay for 75% of a notebook. So these are elements, of course, that are very, very helpful in talking to consumer about extending the lifespan. But as I mentioned, and my colleagues also did, there are several other conditions for that to happen. So the next one, please. Thank you very much for your attention. And Fernanda asked me to start the Q&A session. So I would like to ask Nabil. Nabil made a brief statement that product lifetime extension is not always beneficial. And I thought that Nabil, maybe you could extend on an explanation or on why is that so? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you to the other speakers for really very insightful comments and insight into this area. So yeah, absolutely. The value retention processes are not always the right answer. So what we actually look at from in this regard is the more of, we do have the, from a circular perspective, we can also recycle product. The time where the value retention processes become very effective is when the technology is still valid, when the market is still valid for those products and the market is strong for those products. There are situations where technology changed so fast. So in this case, for example, salvaging parts for what we call the spares, the parts that use, for example, maintenance and repair and things like that can be very effective. Also, we look into the product and how much value added in this product. So if the value added isn't very high, it probably the route to recycling can be the most effective one. And a lot of it, again, depend on the technology obsolescence, technology updates for the product. Also, a product that have long life cycle, for example, and typically consumer product are not necessarily ones that have very strong markets from a value retention processes. Having said that, the largest percentage of product that I look at always, you would see value retention processes can be extremely important and extremely viable, but there are cases definitely where recycling stream might be the best option, again, because the product has a long life already and the product has degraded significantly, or technology has changed, or the value embedded in this product isn't high enough to justify doing this work. The other factor I think that I mentioned also earlier is that if you know, a lot of this product are sold in a variety of markets, and if the collection system is going to be very difficult to separate and bring those products back effectively, if the product is going to be damaged during that shipment back, that reverse logistics system, they are less attractive because the value that you're bringing back isn't high enough.
Thank you, Nabil.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I think we still have some time for questions and answers. So we received some of them here on the panel. I'll do the first one to David, but of course, if the other panels, the other presenters want to complement, you are more than welcome. So specifically about software updates. Google offers 3 years of updates on its Pixel phones, but counted after the model's market launch, not purchased by the customer. This means that a customer buying such a phone 2 years after it entered the market will only have a single year of software updates, including security updates. This is not technically a quality defect, yet it means that the initial functionality is no longer available. How does European legislation protect the consumers of such situations?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Who was the question from? I didn't catch that.
Sorry, Antoine.
Okay, well, Antoine, thank you very much for the question. That's Antoine Julien, I think. Is that right?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, I thought your question in the chat about the spare pricing policy was exactly right. Look, that's a good example that you've given, and it's true in many other product categories too. I was only speaking the other day to a representative from the rail locomotive sector, so a completely different product category. But they're companies that are leasing locomotives and want to keep them in use for perhaps 30 years. When they come to refurbish or even repair the locomotive, they face a similar challenge, which is that the software or the digital spares, shall we call them, that the supplier denies them access, or at least charges such a high price that it becomes uneconomic to consider extending the life of the locomotive. Instead, it has to be scrapped for material recycling, and that's the economic best decision. So that habit is, you'll see it in many different product categories. And my argument here is that it is an expression of market power. And so, Antoine, you are right to say that in most circumstances where you identify an abuse of market power, that regulation is there to address some of those instances. And as far as the current review that's going on in the EU, everybody is fully aware of the example that you've given. It's come up so often during the meetings that if anybody involved in these meetings is not aware of it by now, they must be deaf. So we've really got that. We understand it. What we're not clear about is what the market solution might be. So you can take a legal route to this, but usually in a very competitive market, you find others will step in to solve these problems. And what I want to answer first, the question for me is, why is there not a market solution to that very well-defined problem? Why are there not others stepping in? Because some of the remanufacturing companies and refurbishment companies I know have been going to companies in China to buy in solutions to these problems. and breaking intellectual property rights. And I think that's the wrong thing to do, but it's because of frustration. So I would have expected in a competitive market for someone to step in and recognize that problem, but it doesn't seem to be happening yet. I'd happily hear some comments from others experienced in this area.
So I think I'd like to make a quick comment on this. I think while we promoting value retention processes and facilitating that is very desirable, I think we cannot ignore the market pressure as well. So in cases where there's some abuse, if that happens when there's monopoly or large organizations maybe would have practices that are not necessarily the best, but in reality, I think the market can take care of a lot of things, and I think we need to really ensure that we educate the consumer that there are alternatives, and when there are alternatives, typically a lot of this problem can disappear. So, for example, if you buy a competitor of Google phones, for example, Apple let the consumer basically upgrade for many years, and so as long as there are options, I think the market will demand a lot of those changes, and it would happen. Sometimes it needs to be nudged a little bit with directives and things like that, but in most cases, I think the market can take care of that. I just give you an example. The printer world, where there are a lot of supplies you buy and everything else, a lot of those consumer are very educated in this area. We look at the cost per page, and that includes all the supplies used for the machine, the life cycle of the machine, and many of the publications that compare product like Consumer Reports talk about the cost per page. And educating the customer is the best way to make changes in the marketplace. Having an educated customer understanding what really the issues are, they will demand it, and I think that the manufacturer will make a change. I also want to mention that if you take a look at the remanufacturing world, some of the best examples, we talked about Caterpillar earlier, and Caterpillar is one of the leading company in this area because they're doing it for the benefit of their customers. They're doing it because it's the best thing for their customer. They have refurbishment program, they have remanufacturing program, and that's how Steve Jobs at Apple has always also thought about the practices of the company. Ford, Henry Ford, when he started remanufacturing engines for his cars, it was done from that perspective as well, for the market perspective. So I think, again, I don't want to emphasize this area. The market pressure and having alternatives and educating the customer can result in significant changes without having reverting to policy to mandate it.
Maybe I can add to that, Siddharth here, to the question Antoine raised on what EU is doing to tackle this problem. I would suggest that you have a look at the current proposal for the smartphones and tablets, which is on the table. And there, the first time, there are some requirements for the minimum support given for functionality and security updates. The number of years promised may still not be very high, but at least there is a start there. So that's one thing which is happening. The second is I would like to draw your attention to the directive on digital contents and services from the EU. And even there, it is now required that the seller of the digital content service informs consumer about the number of years for which the updates will be available. So there is no minimum limit of number of years, but at least this requirement that the consumer need to be informed about the updates in terms of number of years. And then there is also this liability of at least 1 year that if something goes wrong with the digital content or service, then the seller is liable for that for 1 year. So that's something also related to the update problem. And then the third thing which we need to keep in mind is that when it comes to support system, for example, operating systems, most of the time these are the things which have not been tackled by the manufacturers themselves because they are outsourced. So there are other providers of these services which can be installed. These programs can be installed in the manufacturer device, but the manufacturer do not have control on this, on the development. Some manufacturers do that. For example, Apple. That's why they are also able to offer higher number of support services in terms of number of years, for example, with iOS, and this is definitely not the case with others. So, but what that actually leads to a scenario that manufacturer controls the whole vertical, let's say, chain of the product, and this is definitely not the case with lots of other product groups in the market, because there is a certain kind of disintegration in the market in terms of control of the value chain, which has advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I thank you. I'm familiar with that, and I can tell you that that's in line with what I was mentioning as nudging, without being too heavy-handed in terms of mandating certain measures. I think to me that definitely is the right level. I think also I want to mention there is a voluntary program in the U.S. called EPEAT, and it's a scoring system basically that provide companies with the accreditation that their product meets a certain level of EPEAT compliance. And for full disclosure, I review for EPEAT. And EPEAT has done significant changes for this industry, the cell phone, the printers, a lot of the electronic industry, and it's a voluntary standard. And the reason it has actually done a lot of good in the U.S. is because the consumer and the large consumer are aware of it and demanding it. And if you listen to Apple keynote, they talk about how their product meet EPEAT standard. And EPEAT standard look into the repair, the upkeep of the product, the upgradability. And that's a voluntary standard that has worked very well because the large consumer are asking for it.
Great, thank you. So the next one, I'll give you to Elio. Actually, I'll give you two questions because they are quite related to consumer behavior, and you all, of course, you are free to complement. So the first one is, in a context in which advertising aimed at consumerism is really intense, how to make consumers choose more durable products? And the other one is, do you see shared usage and most notably rental as a significant improvement opportunity for PLE?
Well, thank you for those questions. First of all, in terms of advertising, I think there is a direct relationship between the perception of consumers in terms of advertising and a critical analysis of advertising by educated consumers. So it's absolutely necessary to educate consumers. Actually, we insist at Akatu that it has to be an education since at an early age, when children and youth are forming their values. And the critical analysis of advertising should come into discussion for the youth, and then go on with the adult consumer. That's a first point, which is very important. The second point is advertising would be limited if regulations in terms of durability and repairability were in place in a way that would be known to the consumer. So that companies would not be free to advertise at their will, but they would have to respect also the regulations and legislations related to durability and repairability. And that would also change advertising in itself, because the planned obsolescence would not be the first resource to which companies the first resource that companies would use. In terms of shared usage and rent, the research that we did together with GlobeScan in 30 countries showed that it has been growing, both shared usage and rent in most countries, especially in European countries, but also in the other regions of the world. of course, still it is not a mainstream business, unfortunately, but it will be in the moment that some of the elements that my colleagues talked about and I talked about are in place in terms of how governments and companies would be working together in terms of durability and repairability, so that the products would be more durable and the shared usage would have economic returns, which would be better than the ones that one has nowadays. But it is, as I mentioned, it is expanding. We have researched 2019, 2020, and now 2021, and there is a growth, continuous growth in shared usage and in rent of products.
Okay, can I move on? So next one, I'll give this one to Nabil. So some manufacturers go to great lengths to avoid other players selling aftermarket parts of their products and thus capturing profitable market share. Do you see this behavior as also hampering remanufacturing and refurbishing?
Yeah, that is that's a terrific question, and I think it is one of the challenges that is faced by in many sectors. You know, the key I think is that if the manufacturer is who actually have the know-how of the product and have the design specs and everything else, the manufacturer is trying to capture more of the market share of remanufacturing, you know, ethically and without hindering others from doing that. There is no it's not a problem. The problem comes when that is done in a way that isn't done you know, ethically and fairly. So it's very important to allow the market to have options, as long as the practices are done properly and the competition. I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you actually see competition over the core. That old product that nobody would have in the past would have done anything with except sending it to a landfill or recycling stream when there's competition over it. The key here, I think, is that we need to be conscious of the fact that it's very important that any practices in the marketplace are fair and done ethically. So if that's not the case, then, you know, that's where I think interference can be very helpful to ensure that there is a fair competition over that market for remanufacturing the product.
Thank you very much, Nabil and Bruna, for this moderation. I'm sorry to say that actually we are running out of time, unfortunately. But I would like to thank you very much for being here today with us. Thank you, Nabil. Thank you, David, Sid, Helio, Bruna, and also Marina, who is helping us with the slides and navigating this system today, which was not really so easy in the beginning. So thank you very much, all the attendees as well. We will share the recording of the session with all of you soon, together with all the presentation materials, if the speakers allow us to do so. If you do have any pressing questions that we were not able to reply today during the webinar, you are welcome to send us through our email. You can use this email that you can see there, the cisp@un.org, and then you'll be happy to either, put you in contact with some of the speakers, or we could answer ourselves. So thank you very much for your participation today. We hope you have enjoyed, and that's all. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Fernanda.
Thank you all.
Marina or Fernanda, I pressed the record button for this and it's being saved to the cloud. So we'll just need to know where it's being saved to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yes, it's it'll be saved on the platform automatically, and we'll be sharing that with you. Thank you very much, David, for your support. Also on the logistics today, that's super appreciated.
Not at all. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.